She was no troublemaker. Rosa Parks was a first-class troublemaker. Rosa Parks knew exactly what she was doing when she sat down on the bus. In fact, she sat down before and refused to get up for a white passenger. But this was the magic moment. And you never know when that magic moment will come. But when it does, if you are involved in social change, you will have helped to build the foundation that will determine history and will determine the course of the future. Rosa Parks was the secretary of the local NAACP. She worked under E.B. Nixon, who had helped to organize with A. Philip Randolph the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. He came out of radical labor politics. They had been working against the racist segregation laws in the South for years. I guess you could say they had been working against the John Birch Society for years, and other groups like that. Rosa Parks had trended the Highlander Center, black and white together, to most effectively achieve social change. So when she sat down on that bus, yes, she knew what she was doing. And you know, when she sat down and didn't get up, and then 4 days later went to court, and the Montgomery Improvement Association had their meeting to choose the person who would lead the Montgomery bus boycott that would lead to the desegregation of the transportation system of the South, they chose a young minister who'd just come into town. They chose Dr. Martin Luther King. Rosa Parks helped to launch Dr. Martin Luther King. The media denigrates activists. That's why they had to say she was simply a tired seamstress. She was no troublemaker. She was an activist, a first-class activist. And what could be more noble than dedicating your life to making the world a better place? And also, what can be more brave? Especially think back to this time, 1955. Let's go back just a few months before to show how brave she was. That was the summer of Emmett Till. That was the summer of this 14-year-old African-American boy. His mom, Mamie Till, in Chicago, sent him to be with family in Money, Mississippi to get out of the Chicago summer. He was sleeping at his aunt and uncle's house with his cousins when a white mob came and they dragged him out of bed. They beat him, and he ended up in the bottom of the Tallahatchie River. They said he had wolf whistled at a white woman. When his body was dredged up, his mother, Mamie Till, did something incredibly courageous. She said she wanted his casket to be open for the wake and the funeral. She wanted the world to see the ravages of racism, the brutality of bigotry. Thousands passed by his casket and saw. And then Jet magazine and other black publications took photographs of his distended, mutilated head, and they published them. And they were seared into the history and consciousness of this country. Could you imagine, or let's just say, Mamie Till had something very important to teach the press of today. Show the pictures. Show the images. Could you imagine if for just 1 week in this country, the media showed the images of war? You know, the top of the fold of every surviving newspaper, photograph and article. The top of every TV and radio newscast. The front page of everyone's website, everyone's homepage, everyone's Facebook page, every tweet was devoted to war. We saw the babies dead on the ground, the soldiers dead and dying, the women with their legs blown off by cluster bombs for just 1 week. Americans are a compassionate people. They would say, no, war is not the answer to conflict in the 21st century. Which brings me back to Egypt. One of the columns that Dennis and I wrote at the beginning of or in the midst of the uprising in Egypt was about the youth not being silenced. It's amazing who participated. The workers all over Egypt, and how powerful the workers threatening to strike and striking was in destabilizing the regime and the young people. You had Wael Gonin, he was the Google marketing executive who was in prison for 12 days during this revolution, and when he got out, continued to call for people to come to Tahrir. Wael had helped to administer a website called, a Facebook page, called We Are All Khalid Saeed. Khalid Saeed was a young man who last June was in Alexandria, Virginia. He had just come out of an internet cafe where he had posted the image of some corrupt plainclothes cops. And when he came out of the internet cafe, the police got him and they beat him savagely to death. The pictures of his savage face were posted on the internet, and this movement began. We Are All Khalid Saeed, calling on people to go to Tahrir on January 25th. And then there is Kareem Anwar, who was one of the most famous dissident bloggers, a young man who was imprisoned for 4 years by Mubarak just for his dissident blog. And then he was one of those organizing Tahrir, and he was in Tahrir. And then Sunday before the Friday that Mubarak resigned, Kareem disappeared. No one knew where he was, who had taken him. Was he imprisoned again, or was it worse? So I was writing to Sharif and texting him and asking, who is Kareem, and do you know where he is? Has he been found? That week, we looked up his website, his blog, and the blog has a banner on it that said, In Memoriam, Christoph Probst, Hans Scholl, Sophie Scholl. This was a young Egyptian blogger who was remembering the White Rose Collective of World War II. And this is where I'll end this talk. And then I'll be signing books, but I welcome you to come up whether you get books or not. Also, by the way, we have these wonderful DVDs of Noam Chomsky coming into our studio for the first time last week, our new studios. And being in Colorado, I always want to credit Rocky Mountain Institute, near Aspen, with Amory Lovins, who helped us build the greenest internet TV radio studios in the country. You're all welcome when you come to New York to come to the set of Democracy Now! To watch the broadcast, and we'll tour you around. When Noam came last week, it was truly wonderful. He came and really surprised us, and we sat for an hour and a half talking about everything from the Middle East to the Midwest. Noam, who has given so much to so many movements over so many decades. So you get a DVD if you get a couple of books, if you want to get a couple of books. But if not, just come up and say hi and tell me what you're concerned about and what you think needs to be covered. But this blog, the banner above it that said In Memoriam, Christoph Probst, Hans Scholl, Sophie Scholl. The idea that this young Egyptian blogger is remembering the White Rose Collective of World War II. Hans and Sophie Scholl were brother and sister. They weren't German Jews, they were German Christians, but they thought, what can we do in the face of the Nazi atrocity? They thought the best they could do was to get information out about what was happening so the Germans would never be able to say we didn't know. So they joined with their professor and other workers, and they started to put out pamphlets, 6 in all. The fourth pamphlet said across the top, "We will not be silent." And they would have them dropped everywhere in Germany. In a courtyard, in a marketplace, in an alley, from one city to another, in the dead of night, so people would get the information. Hans and Sophie Scholl and their professor were captured by the Nazis. They were charged, they were tried, they were convicted, and they were beheaded on February 22nd, 1943. But that motto that they wrote across those pamphlets should be the Hippocratic oath of the media today, should be the Hippocratic oath of us all today. We will not be